Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's a real pleasure to have you here at the Georgia Museum of Art tonight. Thank you for joining us for this very special talk by Eddie Opara, a partner in the New York office of Pentagram. Pentagram, as Eddie will explain to us, is a multidisciplinary, independently owned design studio with an incredibly wide-ranging practice, encompassing graphics and identity, strategy and positioning, products and packaging, exhibitions and installations, websites and digital experiences, advertising and communications, data visualizations and typefaces, and sound and motion. Whew, that's a mouthful. When I was first introduced to Mr. Opara through a mutual friend in New York, I have to admit I was a little bit starstruck. He studied graphic design at the London College of Printing and received his MFA from Yale University. He began his career as a designer at ATG and Imaginary Forces before establishing his own studio in 2005. He joined Pentagram's New York office as a partner in 2010. Eddie has won numerous awards, and his work is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. He serves as a senior critic at Yale's Art School and has taught at the Rhode Island School of Design, the Columbia University School of Architecture, and the University of Arts, Philadelphia. He was named one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business and was featured in Ebony Magazine's Power 100 and Adweek's Creative 100. And his list of clients reads like a who's who of global corporations, including Calendly, Lululemon, Athletica, and Samsung. But more importantly, for our purposes, he counts among his clients some of the most important art and cultural institutions of our time, including the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Mellon Foundation, and also the Menil Foundation in Houston. So you can see why I had to put on my big boy pants when I approached Eddie to see if he would take us on as a client. To my delight, he and his team enthusiastically embraced the challenge of rebranding the Georgia Museum of Art for the first time in more than 75 years, a daunting task for any firm. This demonstrates, I think, Pentagram's commitment to working with arts institutions despite the, shall we say, lower profit margin that typically comes with our nonprofit status. Rebranding is, of course, a major change, and change is always risky, but as the new director here, I felt we needed our visual identity and brand to reflect our new energy, our strengthened commitment to students and the people of Georgia, and our laser-sharp focus on excellence in research, teaching, and bringing you incredible exhibitions and programs. And I think Pentagram has helped us achieve that. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Eddie Opara to the podium to tell us about his work here with us at the Georgia Museum. Eddie?
It's hard for me to state this. I always say, is it y'all? Okay. How are you all doing? Thank you, David, for that wonderful introduction. I shall begin. Audio just a little bit. Thank you. So that's a lot to get through. I am Eddie Opara, and I am an unadulterated Brit. I wanted to sort of start by talking about my life a little bit. I've been actually out of the United Kingdom for 30 years. As of last month, I arrived in August of 1995 as a young boy, or I thought I was a young boy, at Yale. And it was quite a shock to the system to be in such an amazing academic realm. But I learned quickly that you don't stand still in America, that it is a land of immense opportunities and optimism. And I still think that. And even though there may be certain doubts now and again. And, I call this home. I am now a US citizen for many years, and I have kids that are very unapologetically American. But I'm really here to sort of talk about my work, the work that we've done for this particular museum, and I'm going to start off by talking about this gang. This gang I joined 15 years ago, called Pentagram. Pentagram, as David articulately put it, is a group, is a collective partnership, a group of designers made up of graphic designers and industrial designers and writers that has been around for 53 years. I always call myself the Pentagram baby because I was born in 1972, and I always say that Pentagram came out black. The aspect of this is that we have over, as you can see, 4 offices, over 230 global staff, majority of which are designers. We work as in a boutique manner, meaning that we work in very small teams, and we like to have an intimate relationship with our clients, no matter big or small. And that is exceedingly important when large organizations come to us and basically say, what makes you so special? That's actually what makes us very special, indeed. Our ability to be able to deal with an enormous behemoth, but at the same time, a small nonprofit, per se. Right? And we are situated in these 4 offices. We go away every twice a year for what we call the IPC, International Policy Committee, which is us, the sort of board. We are the owners of this organization. We share everything. It is a very collective construct. And so if one is failing, we all fail. And we will pick that person up, even if it's by the scruff of their neck, and move them on. It's exceedingly important for our culture to have something such as that. But there's another aspect to Pentagram, and this was actually sort of written by the senior writer and editor at Fast Company, Mark Wilson. And Mark's a lovely, lovely gentleman. And when he said these words, we were quite gobsmacked, and he identified us perfectly, that we, majority of us are graphic designers, thus we deal with brand on a day-to-day basis. But we don't just create brands, we create language. And language, I think, is a more appropriate term to actually utilize for the likes of us. Brand is an enormous area that large agencies deal with. It deals, I was just talking about it earlier today, the aspects of smell or certain sounds, how you would articulate something on the phone, and much, much more. It's everywhere and everything. And we just touch upon the visual, the verbal identity, the strategy part of it, and the visual part of it. And that's not all of what brand is. But we deal with a lot of language aspects. We create the aspects of the dialogue you're going to have with your customer, with your audience, right? We're going to build those languages up over the course of time. And they're going to speak your language to others and communicate that over the course of time. And so we love that particular term. And with that, these are the types of projects that we deal with. And you've seen the video at the beginning, but these are, I would say, fairly recent projects that we've dealt with and finished, such as Yahoo, PayPal, Slack, Reddit, American Express, MasterCard, Waze, one of my favorites, and Cohere and Navan, and much, much more. And so these are sort of the large corporate systems that we have produced in our offices. But when it comes down to cultural projects and other projects, we are very well known. And I'll just start off with the works that I've actually dealt with, the large organization, smartphone organizations such as Oppo, or Nubank, which is the largest fintech company in the world, to Dashlane, which is one of the most prominent password protection companies, and the likes of redesigning, redeploying Lululemon, and also Calendly, thereabouts. But I also deal with a lot of cultural work. And just recently, just developed the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, which is in the top corner, the Jocelyn is in the middle, New York L'Alliance, the magazine, The Battler, is quite old, and but I love showing it because of that like hanging F. And the likes of the Mellon Foundation, which I'll talk about momentarily. And so, you know, we need the arts and the humanities to be more integrated into the idea of the future and where we're going, or we're going to lose ourselves. And so Elizabeth Arnold, who is the director of the Mellon Foundation, which is the largest arts foundation in the West, not only just North America, but just in the West, has an endowment, I believe, between $8 to $9 billion, you know, came to us and wanted to be seen. They are always behind the scenes, but if they're seen, they can lift up the idea of what the arts means to everyone. And instead of, as she said, instead of quietly funding grantees, we want to be able to carry those particular values, right? We want them to be noticed, and we want to be nurturing, and that's what we try to actually establish here, where we're not just creating fuzzy, furry, curly things on the screens, but we wanted to create some very sort of humanist point of view, a mark that can manifest itself throughout the sort of gravitas of the Mellon Foundation itself, but it can also adapt to any type of arts principle that is actually applied to it, whether it be through the aspects of the colors and also the imagery, but also applying the sense of smart technology to a mark such as this particular M, where it doesn't stay still, it's not static. You can just go easily into a program such as Illustrator, such as this, and it readjusts its variances, and you can actually apply an entirely new structure to it. And so that improvisation is an exceedingly important premise to the promise of the Mellon. And also being able to establish in the bottom there, at their headquarters, the M that just teeters on the top of their doorway, It sort of expose it to all the elements. And it looks entirely different. It looks very contemporary against all the sort of conservative historical elements of their headquarters. But saying that, we also have just built out the Jocelyn Museum, which is in Omaha, Nebraska. And this is a campus that sort of comprises of 3 buildings. And it includes the Hawks Pavilion, which is the new pavilion, the white pavilion, as you can see, created by Schnohetta, that's just opened in the fall of last year. And it's a 42,000 square foot expansion. And what we try to do is assimilate it into a grander narrative, the whole idea of what the Jocelyn was. It needed to understand its overarching community, and it was stagnated, as it were, with a specific age group, and it was a little bit like. Does everybody know this, that a majority of people, this is a question that I believe I heard at college when Disney came over, and they said, what's the population of Americans that go to Disneyland, or Disney World? And we said like 20%, and said no, 5%, right? We have work to do. And so that's very scary. But they just kept saying it's the same people over and over again. They keep going. We have work to do. And so in a sense, it's not so different. It's not so different. This is a narrative that's sort of imbued with historical undertones, societal and cultural symbolisms, and unparalleled sort of artistic sort of beauties that encompass a progressive and forward-thinking discourse that is applied through the aspects of the art, but also through the architecture, right? And what we wanted to do is create a sort of deeper and more dynamic interconnectedness between the form and the content. And to do that, we had to take specific elements, architectural details, and apply them to a principal symbolic element, a thread that works all the way through the identity system. So we're looking at the Jocelyn building, the Scott Pavilion, the Hawks Pavilion, and we're sort of drawing our inspiration from these particular angles to define a type system. And with that system, one can then create a very ubiquitous device that relays the aspects of messaging. And it doesn't only just work as the word mark for the Jocelyn, while you're compiling all 3 of the typefaces, and actually there's 5 typefaces in general, together to make one. But it becomes the sort of lingua franca. The Jocelyn needs only a logo type, and typography is at the foundation of the identity. That's something that we also have done on many occasions, most recently actually with Rivian. If anybody has a Rivian car, we developed the type system, and thus they use that as for everything that they deal with, all their campaigns, and also in the UI structure. It's the most ubiquitous thing. It's not the mark of Rivian that's ubiquitous. It's the type. And it creates a different realm that design can work in. And so with this particular system, it has different types of variances. It allowed us to play, to experiment, to also create different type language for different timelines and different genres. And so from one specific seed. And that is exceedingly important. And so at this moment in time, I always believe that we're at a crossroads of the aspects of design, not because we're in the age of AI, but because we need to start to really consider dormant elements such as type and typography as more identity-driven rather than just red. We are at a crossroads. Georgia Museum of Art was at a crossroads, right? And that is an important starting point that we heard in our initial conversations with key stakeholders. But I want to start off with the story, the dream of Alfred Heber Holbrooks, that he had about 100 images of paintings, and here he is with Lamar Dodd. They both have pipes. I kind of want to get into that a little bit, you know? That they were officially creating the sort of Art Museum of Georgia and also an academic hub at the university is immense. But in regards to that, even at its humble beginnings, it was still seen as this sort of hidden, kept secret, best kept secret. And we needed to fundamentally find out how to create a more unique positioning, right, that was simultaneous to the scholarliness of the museum and towards the public engagement. And those elements that could be seen and overlooked to a certain degree. That duality is where the story really begins and has expanded over the course of time. It's amazing what has happened. 79,000 square feet, 18,000 art objects, and counting. And so what did we have to do? We had to listen deeply to your concerns through the trials and tribulations of this museum. And we interviewed people that are in this room, plethora of staff and trustees, students, and surveyed this particular audience, right? And we needed to understand that this is no ordinary museum. I mean, how can it be situated on a state museum situated on a campus? I've never, ever seen anything like that. That is a very interesting challenge. And it's one of the busiest college campuses in America. It has a lot of energy. So where is that energy? How can we build that energy up and project it out? And thus, we know that it's a two-pronged mission, right? That the museum serves two different mandates, right? The official museum of the state of Georgia, very civic-orientated and public role, that there's the academic museum of the university and the teaching and research role, right? And so, again, I talk about this aspect of the dual nature, right? And what is working for you, right? But what is working against you? It's the same principle. It's this idea, it's this friction between those two specific things. It's hard for visitors to understand, to comprehend, right? It's for the students, and it's for our historians, it's for the general public. Where are we going with this? How can we deal with this? You are definitely caught between those two audiences. And so, oh, that's strange. We had to, from the analysis that we had provided, devise and understand the landscape. The landscape not just for what is local, but also what is actually international, stated. And where, in principle, does Georgia Museum lie? How can we indicate that? And so we have the idea of it, the contemporary to the traditional, the simple to the bold. These are very fundamental features for different museums to determine themselves. And we believe that the Georgia Museum was in that area of the contemporary bold. Why is that? It's because of the values and the principles that are behind you. And I'll read this to you, right? We heard a lot about this, but there's this valued scholarly rigor, right? The rising student energy, that sort of pulsating aspect of one of the busiest campuses in the United States. But then this space, this place, this sense of place is and utilized for well-being, right? The idea that well-being programs could be actually there. There's this vibrant art scene in Athens, right? And these all really fuel up the momentum of this museum, right? How can we provide a better potential story that can move forward? But there was one key aspect, and I brought it up earlier. It's this hidden gem, right? But it's confusing to access, right? It's hidden. How can we take a gem and shine it up again and show it its sparkle? And what we did is, and I'm not going to read all this, it's just a lot. But what we did is we looked at, we had sort of 3 specific takeaways, right? And what it needed to do, it's on the bottom section, right? And what the museum needs to do on the first is really articulate itself as being leading. It leads within the academic part of it, the scholarly part. But that's not enough. It needs to lead on another local cultural level, and it needs to devise that. And we needed to create deeper engagements with the aspects of exhibitions and arts on display and how to activate those particular principles. Be bolder with these introductions to these particular shows. And look at it towards a more diverse audience and be more diverse within the articulation of the design. And so you can state all that, and you could be exceedingly bold, but this particular identity really has to have staying power, consistency, system, right? And it needs to be effective over a long term. That is exceedingly important. And that's where normally any type of institution, if it's not homed correctly, it will drop and fail, right? And so I'm going to sort of move into an area of the positioning, more so the brand idea, the North Star, the directive in regards to if I can't remember what we're about, I can always go back to this particular term or terms, and it's wonder and wonder. And it's sort of showing the idea that it's inviting. It's an invitation to explore, right? It's an invitation to explore. It's also an invitation to slow down. I have this principle of slowing the F down on everything, but like slow down and really discover things, right? To be really curious about things. And that will come up again in the aspects of inspiration, right? So you're asking questions, you're imagining things, you're learning, you're on these journeys of the specific collections, you're studying the objects, you're seeing art through the ages, you're feeling inspired. These are principal aspects, but you need a tone of voice to go with that brand idea, that directive, that North Star. And that tone of voice is inspiring curiosity. And it's the idea that it's welcoming, right? With touches of artfulness. Right? So how do you leave just a little unsaid? So how can you be inspired by a specific question? How can it be warm and welcoming? Of course, that's very much needed. It needs that touch of artfulness. It needs to be slowed down and relaxed, unhurried. These are the principles that are key, that you want to uncover. You want to have time to uncover yourself. You want to have time to discover. And so that energy that we see on campus is just slowed down, and the engagement of understanding art begins. And to do that with this audience and the local audience and the audience that's global, you have to engulf yourself within the aspects of diversity. Nobody is the same. That's not going to be the case in point. Everyone needs more art in their life, right? And so how do you start to relay the message? You create what we call a variable or variant, right? Put any word in that blank, but don't have profanity, please. You have this idea of discover and explore and study and share, right? So art is so good for you, and everyone could use more of it. We need it right now. We all need it right now. Oh my God, we need it right now, right? The sense of dynamics and the sense of change, the possibilities of what art can do, how it can explore, make, see, share, enjoy, give, do, discover, experience, appreciate, study, and much, much more, right? But we have to remember that we are on a college campus. We have to remember that we have a partner in this plot, and that partner is this university. And so we needed to make sure that anything that we do is balanced appropriately with the university. You don't want to be a sore thumb sticking out. That's not the case in point. You want to be that gem that can be looked at and appreciated. But then there's also a reflection of the university when you're looking at it. And so we had created a co-branding voice that sort of starts off within the sort of university guidelines. So we looked at the university guidelines and made sure that we had the appropriate sort of terminology that we're using. And we called this University Plus, the sort of affiliation of the university with this particular museum and respecting the tonal guidelines of the university. We can add our own uniqueness, but we cannot forget that they are a true partner. And so with that being said, how does one connect to the visuals? I think you've all come to see the visuals. How do you create a structure, a conduit, a bridge that connects to the visual system from the verbal? And we had also, at the same time as the stakeholder interviews that provided a lot of information and the surveys, that we'd also done a brand audit. I'm not really here to run through the brand audit. It's like looking at your taxes. It's not that very interesting. But these are some of the types of things that we had to sort of look at, right? This sort of identity and understanding where the sense of a unity and consistency has gone, and the feeling of sort of incongruous structuring is in place. And so if you take the monogram, for example, does it have a place anymore? Right? And from the survey, this is partly the fact, right? As far as the brand identity goes, I'm not sure. I don't know if I could picture a logo off the top of my head. Even though there's a whacking great one in the front, it's still not deemed part of the identity. So something has gone wrong, has gone very, very wrong here, right? It's not to the expectations of the student or the audience. And one needs to start to migrate to an entirely different structure, to be brave and bold, strong, unique, and unexpected, right? The idea here is that the museum wants to mostly have that sense of bravery and boldness, right? But with a sort of sprinkling of safety, right? Specifically because of that duality with the university. So we have to be very, very careful about this usage. But there's one thing that just kept on gnawing at us at Pentagram, and it was this hidden gem, literally a gem. And the aspects of the diversity and the dynamics of the audience, bringing those things together, the exploratory elements of this museum, the discovery elements of this museum, how can we project that into a visual construct? And so we looked at it from a gem. We looked at a gem and looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. And what did we see? Well, we saw facets. We saw a lot of facets, right? And this is one of those sort of interesting sort of nouns, right? The facet is really sort of like this one side of something, one side of something that has many sides. It's really weird, and it's especially for cut gems. It's really unique. It's exceedingly unique. The different types of pattern structures that you can devise from it, the perspectival viewing that you can create from it, the distortion you can create from it. But how do you simplify this? How do you get it down from this complexity down to something which is more solid? Well, it's not that hard. You take a rectangle and you start to carve, like a sculptor, the form. And the form of a gem. But that's not enough, right? And we'll go back to that complexity very shortly. That's not enough. You come back to the idea of the Jocelyn, and that's that idea of the ownable typeface, right? The ownable typeface that creates an enduring voice. That's really key. The sense of ownership is important. Creating a bespoke type family really signals that the museum values craft and distinctiveness, right? It's exceedingly important. But then there's also this consistency and clarity. So you have this sort of uniformity that letterforms give you, and it keeps communications coherent, right? There's also the aspects of longevity. So whilst like logos may get refreshed, well-endowed type systems called grow, they will grow themselves out into different languages, right? Different diacritics, right? Different glyphs. And it becomes the key anchoring of the brand itself. And so that's what we did. We started to challenge ourselves to create the lettering first off for Georgia Museum of Art. And as you can see, this is one of my designers, Rory, trying to deal with a T. Not easy, trust me. But there's, the fact of the matter is, when building letterform, it's not easy. It's not easy. Logos are way easier, right? Way easier. Why? Because of the principal differences within each anatomy of the letter form, right? And how they have to come together to create words, right? And so we had taken that sort of faceted look by cutting off the edges, and we'll talk about that later. But there's something also here that you don't see. As you can see, the exterior is very stoic, very sharp, very acute, but the interior is actually soft. And so it's a play between these dual things. Again, duality is an important factor. So we're also trying to marry the artistic principles that you would find in a painting into a piece of type. Maybe, maybe not, right? And we found that to be really, really interesting. But we found, and we were actually told this by the museum, that this reminds them of this, right? So before 1964, the 1964 change to the current sporting oval G for Georgia, we've created some sort of accidental visual correspondence with the 1950s. We didn't know. How about that, right? I thought that was actually a lovely thing. Fate, as it were, right? Again, corresponding to the balance that we want with the university itself. But then how does one start to look into that complex inner form of a gem? How does one start to consider that as a principal idea? And how effective can this be in its function? What we had to do is carve out more of Georgia Facet, right? Expand that typeface first, see if it actually had the bones. And we are pulling out, we're pushing further. I know that we just got an email to add more diacritics to the system. We will, by the end of the week, add those examples, right? But again, it's this consistency that we want to tackle, right? The ability to have your own enduring voice is imperative to the success of this system. And with that, we can then start to play away as much as we want, to look at different ways that these particular facets of this gem start to refract and reflect. But also, we need to have static forms, right? It has an ability to shift, to juxtapose itself, to activate itself in a static form. So, in a way, it's a dynamic word mark in static form, and that's exceedingly important. But I also want to harp on about the next item, the idea that you are the Georgia Museum of Art, but your acronym doesn't work. And so eliminating that acronym for something far more simple. So instead of having something which is cumbersome, right, you start to eliminate that acronym and replacing it with a visual disruptor that is never going to be an acronym, but a visual hint, right? A suggestion to partake, to go, right? And thus but within the consistent visual language that we have created. And so with that, we also want to make sure that we activate the more art. And having that ability to have all the letters within more art in your name is a lovely thing. So activating that at any moment in time, whether it be online, in an ad, or on social media, or in behind the information desk, is an important factor, right? I'm always asked about color, and I say, oh, bollocks. Do we have to use colors? I'm a little bit like my partner, Michael Barut, who has chromophobia. He actually has a fear of color. If you've ever seen any of his work, its majority is black, white, and red. Really, I don't know how he sells it, but he gets away with it. It's quite fascinating. But with this, we wanted to make sure that we have a set of primary colors that were exceedingly vibrant and also different, but also marrying themselves to the university as well. You know, having the bulldog red with our the red on the end, glory, glory red, is super important, but also having that yellow that we call illumination, right? We want to make sure that these colors are utilized. They're not just hinted at, they're really pushed. The ability to push them is exceedingly important. Do not be scared of color and its significance. And we also look at the importance of the smallest player on the pitch, right? The icons. A lot of times when we see design systems, they've drawn out icons that don't marry to anything. They're dislocated, dissociated. We, in principle, want to utilize the facet design, the device, on everything, right? So you have that constant consistency and coherence all throughout your icon systems. And this is just a small example of them. But let's get into some layouts and the importance of changing layout structures. I mean, we have a different way of presenting your student night. We had seen the examples prior to these redesigns, and we said to ourselves, it's really needs to be student orientated. You're going to grab an image and you're going to copy that image at whatever resolution, and it's going to be student night orientated, and it feels like it's student night. Why can't we set up a system that also creates that structure, right? And we can actually have overlay printing on top of it. But you can also, if you didn't mind, you could make it duotone, tritone, or full color. And those principles are all there. We're trying to extrapolate the system so you have the choice. You have more choices to provide your audiences. And with that aspect of overlay and aspects of type, you can start playing with type more, and you start to know the nuances of this particular typeface of Georgia Facet and what the properties are. How good is it? And how it stands out in a very bold and brash manner. How it holds itself in a very signatory way. How it can add itself to your magazine facet. I mean, your magazines, I didn't even realize that. I was just so dumb. I was like, oh my God, your magazine's called Facet too. That's phenomenal. And how that actually reads. Creating a system that is, you could say, modernist in its construct, very Swiss European, very white-spaced, lots of tension within the aspects and corners. But the ability to provide that was important. So you're not overriding the body copy so much. It's very, I would say, peaceful. I don't like to say simple. It's an overly used term. But again, in other sort of newsletters and magazines, such as in Dialogue, it is also utilized. So this spatial arrangement is very consistent. And then, and surprisingly so, your banners and how lovely works of art that you have. I'm really trying to demonstrate and push those images out, but how they're associated significantly with the mark, the acronym, the idea, the gentle, I think it's a gentle go. I think it's quite loud, I know, but I think it's a gentle go. The articulation of that, the importance of it, the rising up to another level of an institution that is exceedingly engaging with all types of art. And we get to the ending where the complexity of the gem is now utilized, figuring out a system where we can actually produce images from, how they can actually be fractured, dislocated, or disrupted, but it becomes a signature piece. It doesn't only hold that particular form. We can change and adjust, and calibrate the ability of it being subtle and being more expressive. And so you have those abilities right in front of you now. The ability that it becomes very signature orientated, very contemporary in its form. And as I've seen in at the back in the information desk, the use of the event structure. So before I finish, building this system has been an adventure. It's been wonderful because of so many different parts. And I'll start off with the stakeholders. All of you, thank you for being candid with your commentary. We wouldn't be here without it. We wouldn't be here without the idea of discovery, of what art gives us, and how we can actually promote art through the aspects of design and communications. And on another level, I really do hope that we promote the Georgia Museum of Art on a global scale so people really notice it for what it is. Thank you. And there's just one more thing. Another video. Okay, that's it. Thank
you so much, Eddie.
They were getting overrun. So they had the good sense to build their own system, right? And it's massive, multiple languages, and it works so well. It then had the ability for them to bring in their own data visualization structures. They didn't have that before. And so it becomes a catalyst for more things to actually occur. It took 6 months.
How did y'all design the color scheme for the museum? Because it's really strong, and I'm like hearing talk about illumination for yellow, but that group of colors wouldn't be my first choice. Just like they work really well, they're strong. It's just how did y'all come about it?
Yeah, we had 2 to 3 different options. One is one of my favorites is called adapting colors. Yeah, so or adopting. So basically, you would take an image from the collection, and then you would pinpoint the specific colors for that and use it. So it adapts to. So Mellon uses that principle. So they don't have a color. And I really constantly believe in that because I'm like, please, oh please, I can't figure out the color for you. But you're going to figure out your colors yourself. And so we came up with another color system that was a little fruity, but then we had the vibrant colors. But we didn't want to have the common vibrancy that you'd have. And we wanted to extract greens. We also wanted to make sure that we were very careful of any of the competitors as such. So the yellow blacks are a little problematic, I know this. But it's still there. And how those colors work in combinations is really quite wild. Right? So I used in my presentation, with those highlighted text, all those combinations of colors each and every time. So there's multiple ways to use those colors. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
If you had any advice for graphic design students who are ambitious and just want to get the most out of the career in the world, what would you give?
Travel. Can't stay in one location. The internet's not going to give you everything. It gives you some things, but not everything. I say travel. One of the things I really always loved is being able. I was just saying that this afternoon to be able to travel to other studios around the world and have conversations, make friends, long life friends. We're in it's an art community. It's a design community. It's very similar. Have discussions about where things are going, come up with new ideas, maybe even join a movement as such. These are exceedingly important factors. It's not the idea of just going to say, I've got to go get that job, pay off this particular loan. I understand that. But you've got to start to also fundamentally think about that this is a way of life and you're going to have it for the rest of your life. It's not just a job.
Thank you.
Can I take the one in the back? And then.
So you have like all these like different complex ideas and like pieces that go into like the brand that you like, So I guess my question is, how did you decide to hone in on like the gem as like that's your main thing to kind of go off of? How did you decide when to stop looking at other things and just kind of look at that?
We kept on hearing about this hidden gem. That specific term, right? The students people walk past this building on a day-to-day basis, and they don't know what's in it. And we were we did have conversations in the team about, that's a little too obvious, right? But, it's Occam's razor, right? Right? The principle that is the first thing that comes in your head is the thing that's going to be correct. Occam's razor is a really interesting thing, and that's what it was. It was very instantaneous. It was. I don't like to use the term obvious. It's right there. Yeah, and there's the fact of the matter is, and this is a concern when one thinks about things in motion and sense of movement, or they're larger than just exploding the idea of a particular mark. People nowadays look at that as a trend. It is not a trend if you say it's not a trend. and thus it will be a consistent signature that you use across the time. You don't need to change that. It's always going to be there, hopefully. Oh.
Okay, so I think when you were being introduced, it was mentioned that you taught at an architecture school, is that correct?
Yeah, Columbia.
Okay.
Yeah.
So given that you're a graphic designer, could you tell me more about your experience there? In architecture?
Oh yeah, right. So I initially I was in the art school at Columbia, and then I taught a semester at Columbia School of Architecture. And what I taught was data visualization. Why was I teaching data visualization to architects? I think it was the aspects of looking at how data could be used to then promote different forms, different ways of seeing not so much a building, but an overarching experience. And it's very complicated, very complex, but in principle, that's what architects also do today. They look at data a lot, and then they try to devise new pathways, new rooms, new spaces based upon that specific aspect of data.
Thank you.
Cool. Jim, oh, hey.
Hey, I love how you began the talk talking about Pentagram and this idea of a collaborative, and it was really striking, and ending it as well with Pentagram. And I was sort of thinking about how few collaboratives there are, like artist collaboratives. I could only think of Magnum as a kind of the similar, but you're very, very different in terms of your connection. But with that, you spoke throughout, even at the end, about we and the group, and it wasn't as though you talked to a bunch of people and then you went in your office and you created the brand or the logo or however you want to describe it. So I guess that's a long preview to the question of, could you talk a little bit about how you work with your team, and is it the partners that are working, or are you working with your own separate team?
Really?
That collaborative aspect, I mean, because in essence, it seems that this came out of a collaboration both with the stakeholders, with Georgia, but with your team. It's really a group project that then is imagined in this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one of the things that I should want to talk about is that even though we're sort of like seen as figureheads, or seen or perceived as figureheads of this or salesperson, when we get introduced to a potential client, right? We always say that we are always going to be the head designer on the project, right? What does that mean, right? That means that we'll be in every meeting, presenting, designing, talking with you. We're not going to say, this is great, I'm going to sell you everything and walk away. And by the way, this is the team that's going to help you and see you goodbye. It's never like that. It's always trying to have an intimate relationship with the client as best as possible. And so, with that being said, on all calls, the designers, and including interns, are on those calls listening. Afterwards, we have a very constructive conversation in regards to our specific next steps, even though we've related to the likes of David and team. We have these very in-depth conversations and decide in regards to which directives we need to go. So the likes of having Sandra in regards to strategy, myself in regards to design, working with the likes of Ruben and Rory and Jonas. This is very important that they question me, right? And they question me a lot, right? And that's just the way it works. You have to be exceedingly candid. I'm one of the designers. It's like very collegiate. I'm one of those designers, even though I'm running the team. I sit down, I draw my stuff up, They might not like it. I might like it. We'll put it in. We might not put it in. Yeah, I'm part of that, and that, yeah, it's seriously important. And I learned that from a studio that I worked at. Where's George? The 2x4. Michael always did that. So yeah, it's really important that that happens.
Thank you.
Great, I think we should give you a break and thank you again so much.